The president recognizes the realism of the situation, and he also recognizes that you can't vilify both sides completely because then you're never going to get them in a room together. But the president has been recognized by EU leaders as the only person who can put an end to this conflict. And frankly, he's the only international leader who's really taken the threat of Russia seriously.
It's nearly been 200 days since Donald Trump took office. Exclusive polling from The Times reveals that American voters see Mr. Trump's drive to arrest and deport immigrants as the main achievement of his presidency so far. But what about the other pledges he promised to deliver? We all remember his vow to end the Ukraine war in the first 24 hours of his presidency. Well, nearly 200 days in, and as the Kremlin confirms Trump is set to meet Vladimir Putin in coming days, could he be finally close to somehow achieving that promise? Let's speak to Matt Braynard, former Trump campaign advisor on data and strategy. Mr. Braynard, would you agree that that record on immigration is probably your candidate's best achievement so far?
You know, he came into office like many presidents, making a lot of promises, but it's been revolutionary to have a political leader in this country that actually keeps them. And he's been keeping promises big and small. Clearly, the biggest driving issue in the election in 2024 was our wide open border where drug traffickers, sex traffickers, criminals, rapists were coming across unabated. And the Biden administration was literally flying migrants into the country to cause even more problems. But President Trump put a quick end to that. That's something that every president of my lifetime said they would do, but only one has done it. The southern border has nearly zero crossers, and of all the illegals that are still here, nobody has done more to arrest and deport them than the president has. It's really marvel. It's something to marvel because we've never seen anything like this before. And he's keeping this promise, and he's kept many other promises. You know, the first day he was in office, he kept his promise to pardon or offer clemency to all of the January 6th political prisoners. He's kept his promise to incorporate RFK Jr.'s plans to reduce questionable substances in our food and drugs. So just all across, and trade. He's done a remarkable job on trade, on trying to address the severe deficit we have with so many countries around the world.
Before, Matt, we get into a full list of all of his achievements.
It's a long list.
I'm sure you're willing to give it to us in full. And some Brits would love to have the sort of his strength on immigration over here. But one area where he clearly hasn't delivered is to end the war, as I've just suggested, in Ukraine. And some of us have sort of been confused by the zigzagging of his policy on this. Where do you think he is now on recognising Putin as the real villain of the piece in this tragedy that's taking place on the European continent?
I think the president is a stone cold realist, and he realizes that the only way this conflict is going to end is serious pressure on both sides to encourage them to come to an agreement, because it's got to be a bilateral agreement between the two of them. Otherwise, it's just going to continue as it has for as long as, the EU has been promising to deliver, massive victory for Ukraine, taking back everything, including Crimea. That's just not going to happen. And the president recognizes the realism of the situation. And he also recognizes that you can't vilify both sides completely because then you're never going to get them in a room together. But the president has been recognized by EU leaders as the only person who can put an end to this conflict. And frankly, he's the only international leader who's really taken the threat of Russia seriously. So for a long time now, Russia's war machine has been put up by India buying oil from them. Haven't heard a peep from EU, UK leaders, nothing. But the only person who's holding them accountable for that, for propping up that Russian war machine, is President Trump, announcing even more punitive tariffs on India because they're supporting the Russian war machine. So I think that more folks should follow his lead in putting real pressure on Russia, but ultimately recognizing that you got to get these two guys to agree to stop the killing.
I would completely agree with that. And one thing that I think is inadequately been recognized by Europeans is that your president really does have a distaste for young people dying in war. And, we've seen so many young lives extinguished in Ukraine and Russia. And I understand what you say about the importance of getting two parties to the negotiating table. But I tell you what we really need to see. I mean, I'm interested in the sanctions on India, but the real supply is coming from China in the shape of drones. They're giving the kind of technology and equipment to Russia that is allowing them to launch the drone attacks on Ukraine. Are we going to see any sign of action against China from President Trump?
Look, this is the president. No president has been tougher on China than this one, including in his first term. And I don't have any doubt that in the back channels, because you know how diplomacy works, and this is, again, a very delicate situation, we're giving the president room to operate because he's delivered on every other thing he's promised he would do. And we know that in his heart, he's doing everything he can, as you say, to stop the slaughter of a war that never should have started, that was started on promises that should never have been made and could have been completely avoided if we had his kind of leadership in the White House at the time. So I believe that President Trump is bringing everything to bear. You may not see all of it publicly because that's just how diplomacy works sometimes. You have to have some confidentiality in your conversations. But I believe that he's doing everything the United States can to bring this slaughter to an end so that both Ukraine and Russia can in the future have a prosperous and bright future.
I interrupt. You were giving a list of Donald Trump's achievements earlier, and I interrupted. And I think I interrupted you at the point when you were talking about tariffs. Now, tariffs clearly haven't been as bad as some doomsayers thought, but it's still pretty early days, isn't it, to assess their impact. The sweeping new tariffs on about 90 countries around the world are coming into effect in different stages and at different levels. But inflation is never beaten. How worried are you that inflation could re-emerge in America if and when the tariffs are fully implemented? And the opinion poll evidence does suggest that a plurality of Americans do not support the tariffs policy.
So you brought up China a moment ago, so I'm going to ping pong that back at you.
Okay.
In my lifetime, China has gone from manufacturing chopsticks to electric cars and dominating the world of manufacturing. They did that entirely under the strongest tariffs and trade prevention policies they've had to block out international competitors. So I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing that they were able to accomplish that despite having an incredibly protectionist trade policy. So moving forward, look, inflation, it's at a pretty record low. We've even had prices falling. The new and used car segment in airfare is down. Inflation year to year is about 2.7%, which is incredibly low for us. And despite there being significant tariffs, despite billions and billions of dollars coming in. But the other thing to think about, at least from our perspective on tariffs, is that as they've gone up, we've had something called the Trump effect, which is all these international corporations that were previously shipping stuff to us are now making them here. Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC, is investing $100 billion to start manufacturing their chips here in Arizona and Phoenix. So this Trump effect is bringing more investment into the United States, which when an economist does their little calculation about what the impact of tariffs are going to be, they never take into account the over $8 trillion in new investment coming into the United States as a result of President Trump's aggressive trade policies.
Oh, well, you make a very good point there. Can I just talk about something perhaps a little bit seedier, and that's the whole business of Jeffrey Epstein. One of my favourite podcasts covering American politics is The Editors from National Review Online. I don't know whether you're a listener to it, but they were talking the other day about how the White House at the moment is engulfed by discussion of the Epstein scandal, almost the only thing that advisors are talking about behind the scenes. How potentially damaging is it for President Trump if the promise to release all the Epstein files, such as they exist, isn't delivered?
Look, I trust the president and his administration to handle this responsibly, but if you go online on certain social media sites, it's at a fever pitch. But I'm out in the country every day. I work for candidates all over the place. We talk to voters nonstop. They're concerned about their jobs, the safety of their children, the future of this country, as its economic growth and national security have been so much in doubt in previous administrations. So that's really what the voters on the ground here care about. I know there's a whole cartoon show now on social media focused entirely on this issue and throwing out theories about it. And, I hope that all the information comes out, and I believe this administration is pledged to transparency. But again, it's kind of a social media phenomenon. And, when I've got folks out knocking doors every day, talking to voters. They're more concerned about things like inflation and the cost of living.
Final yes or no answer from you, please, if I may, Mr. Braynard. Will Donald Trump win the Nobel Peace Prize?
I can't think of anybody that has done more to earn it ever. And I actually, one thing I want to point out to you before we go is that I know you have a lot of trouble with your political leaders in that country keeping promises and even stopping you've got a whole navy and you can't stop dinghies from coming into your country. President Trump can take advantage of his Scottish ancestry, claim citizenship over there because he's going to be done here in 3 years. Maybe he can go over there and solve some of your problems.
Well, it wasn't a yes or no answer, but I loved it. Thank you so much. That was Matt Braynard, an advisor on strategy to the last Donald Trump campaign.